Kia ora and welcome everybody. Ko Michelle Gallagher tōku ingoa. I'm the program support here at the Centre for Social Impact, and today you're coming along to a Te Pūaha talk. I think I recognise a few names, so welcome back. But if you're new, Te Pūaha Talks is a free series of workshops for the community sector by the Centre for Social Impact with support from Foundation North. And Foundation North like to see how many of their grantees are coming along and taking advantage. So if you can get your mouse ready, there should be a little poll pop up on your screen. Can you see that? Oh, yes, you can. I can see that going along. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much. I'm going to hand over to Esther. She's going to start us off with a karakia, introduce herself, and yeah, welcome. I hope you really enjoyed today's session.
Kia ora te whānau. Thank you so much for being here today. Welcome. So my name's Esther Whitehead, Esther Whitehead tōku ingoa, and I am the climate co-lead for the funders' commitment on climate action. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm just going to start though by just seeing who's actually in the room. Now I just can't see you at the moment, but that's okay. So I'm just going to ask you to raise your actual hand rather than your button hand. And I'm going to ask who is currently on a board. Okay, quite a few of you. Okay, this is good. That's useful to know. Who is currently a funder, a community funder of some kind? Nobody? Or maybe somebody, yeah. Okay, and who works like in a community group, some kind of charity? Most of you. Okay, cool. And has anybody here done the Institute of Directors Chapter 0 stuff? Okay, good to know. So we will touch on the space of climate governance today as well, but it's not going to be the focus of the presentation, but just really, really good to just know who's in the room. So I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully make a start on things today. So just bear with me a second. Okay, can you all see my screen, Michelle? Wonderful. Okay, so thank you so much for being here. It's a Tuesday lunchtime, so feel free to eat away as you listen. This is not going to be a massively interactive session just because it's more about the funders' commitment on climate action. If you do want an interactive session at all on climate action and how you can be a part of that, then please do let us know. So I'm going to start us today with a karakia. Whakarongo ki te taio, whakarongo ki te tangi e te whanua, whakarite te ara mona uri whakatipu, tia kina te ao, tia kina te tanga, humie, huie, tai kie. So that is listen to the natural world, listen to the voice of the land, prepare the path for future generations, protect the planet and protect what's precious. So I really wanted to just start with that sentiment and to mention words like the natural world and future generations, because quite often in climate speech, it all gets lost in the jargon. So let me start with explaining perhaps who I am, what we do, and how it all works. So we are Climate Action Aotearoa, which was set up by the community trusts of New Zealand, of which there's 12. And it was designed by some awesome people in our community trusts who set up the Climate Action Working Group. And what they've achieved is they've set up a funders' commitment, which is like a pledge. And so far we have all of these signatories to our pledge or our commitment. And these are made up of the 12 community trusts and also some other organisations as well. Now, just to state that we haven't actually focused massively on growing our signatory base. We've really focused on what we're doing to make real impact before we kind of go out to grow our signatories. Second thing that I want to speak to, and this is massive and it's not a big component of today, but it's what's called the Tika transition, and it's the work of Professor Maria Baj from Victoria University. Essentially, the Tika transition is speaking to a just transition, and it guides all of the work of the funders' commitment. It's embedded in everything that we do. So if you're a funder and you want to be a part of our signatory, then this piece is really important to understand. And the third thing that I want to mention at the outset, but I won't be spending time talking to today, is something called the Kaupapa of National Significance. And it's a climate action fund that we've started through Climate Action Aotearoa. And this year it's looking like about $1 million, which is specific to climate action. We started this last year. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it's actually quite a small amount, but it's significant because it's specific to climate action. So last year we funded Lawyers for Climate Action, which is a really strong advocacy group doing amazing mahi. We also did the Nature Conservancy and their incredible work on wetland restoration, and also Parakore, which is iwi hapu-led and specifically around waste-free futures. So there's going to be a lot to today, but hopefully I'll give you the context of the work we do and why we do it. These 7 things that are written here are the actual commitment which our signatories have signed up to. So I don't think I need to read through them, but I am just going to point out a couple of them. So obviously, first up is Reflecting Te Tiriti and our national document, which supports all of the work for what we do around Māori aspirations specific to climate action. I've also mentioned the word tika, and this is about an equitable or a just transition. So the words just transition kind of leave us cold, right? Like, what do they even mean? A just transition, it's really jargon based, and it takes away, I think, all the empathy and compassion which many of us are in this work for. So a just transition really, well, if I reframe it, we are living in a time of great transition. We are living in a time that's fascinating because we're transitioning from structures that no longer serve us and further marginalize people. And so when we speak to a Tika transition, the whole point of that work is to focus on everything that's going to create more equity for those who are most marginalized. If we don't do this mahi, we are going to see further inequity. The other areas that I'll probably speak to are not so much these because they're really obvious, but perhaps this one here, decarbonise our investments and operations. Today I'm going to be speaking quite a bit about investments. So if finance leaves you dry, I hope to make it a bit more interesting and talk about why it's so important. And lastly, reporting. We're all in the job of actually, bettering and serving our communities, and how we report on the impacts that we make is really crucial. We want to get it as right as we can. So a Tika transition was number 2, and I just want to mention that on the 2nd of July we have a signatory hui. So if any of you are signatories or want to become signatories, we're going to hear from the authors of a Tika transition. And they're going to be speaking to all of that stuff that I've just mentioned in the just transition space, but making sense of it from an iwi hapu-led perspective. So find out more at the end if you wish to. Okay, so how do we tell our impact story around climate action? So I came into this role with my colleague Arahonui West, who's the co-lead for climate action with myself. And the 2 of us kind of inherited this incredible mahi, but it was somewhat conceptual. So it's about turning it into real impact. And what we've kind of achieved is to kind of look back at what are the facts? What are we actually looking for in the impact space? What's the evidence? And how can we look forward to progress that to some of the goals that are clear that our community network has? So we've got huge ambitious goals, but they were very much sentiment driven. Like, we really want to be net zero. We've got no idea how we're going to get there. And that's okay. But we do actually need to start to substantiate what that looks like. We also asked this really important question here: who or what has benefited? And we don't just mean in grant making. And importantly, who or what did not benefit? So this is really important around the external aspects that aren't just in our grant making. So obviously we fund out to our communities, but what happens, for example, in our investment space? Are there fossil fuel investments that are actually harming our environment? So it's important that we know what they look like. So essentially what this meant was that we had a whole ton of more questions than we did answers. So we started first in the impact space around granting, because it's the most obvious step for us as funders. Okay, what are we doing well in terms of measuring impact in granting? Well, we know from the 2019 JB Ware research that only 4% of grant making is towards Te Taio and climate action. There's like an incredibly small number. And I recently was commissioned to do some work to actually establish why it's so low. And there's numerous reasons which I won't get into today, but what I will say is that the way that we have historically collated our data for coding how we grant is quite sketchy and quite kind of, I guess, traditional. So for example, environment might be lumped in with animal welfare and environment, or it might be lumped in with heritage and environment, for example. And so we know that the data isn't actually serving the story as well as it could. So one of the first things that we've done, which is starting to take shape this year in 2025, is to firstly answer the question, well, what constitutes as climate action? It sounds really simple, but when we speak to climate action, we're all speaking about different things. And the first thing we realized is that a climate action grant is very, very wide and needs some nuance in terms of interpreting, what actually makes up climate action. So we've now got these 6 codes. And even if you're not a signatory, one thing that I would advise is that potentially if you're a funder, you could look at how better you code your own grant making so that you can identify how your spend is serving climate and serving future generations. So we've started to get all the data back from our signatories, and that will make up part of our annual report this year. But what we're seeing is really exciting, because we're seeing that, for example, this trust has got 18% of its total spend on climate action. And of that, 40% is around the TICA transition. And I'll explain some of this in a moment. Another example is 16% of total granting is for climate action. And again, we can see the breakdown of what that looks like. This one here is 20% is towards climate action, with biodiversity and ecological restoration and TICA transition making up the most funded sectors. So this is just stuff that we actually didn't see in the data. So really important for a compelling narrative, and also to further support things like co-funding into it in the future, inviting other people to be part of that. If we look at what some of those actual funding recipients got, or what was funded, these are some examples. And we see a lot of nature-based solutions, but we also see some tech solutions. And I just wanted to highlight this one because 22 Marais received solar panels. And the reason I bring this up specifically is because this actually wasn't coded under energy or emissions reduction, even though it could have been. The reason that this was not coded there is this was chosen to be coded under TICA transition, because the main purpose and outcome when we went back to the recipients was around a just transition for marginalized communities to ensure that they had their own resilience. So it's really kind of important to look at some of these nuances and to kind of go back to, okay, why are grant recipients wanting the kind of solutions that they're looking for? So around the funders' commitment on climate action, we know that there's these 7 things that people have kind of pledged to do. And we know that granting is the space that we do most of the mahi, but how do we tell the story beyond granting? So essentially, what happens in the non-funding grant-making parts of our organisation? So if we look at the 5 levers of most of our philanthropic organisations, they kind of look like this. I've broken them down for you. So we've got operations, we've got our strategy, we've got our governance, we've got our investment, and we've got our grant making. And as we can see, grant making is just one component of this. If we did it from a net worth point of view, the grant making might look like 5% of the investment portfolio. So for 2025, well, I mean, we've been doing this work since 2023, but for 2025, we're really focusing on what happens here and what we can do to achieve greater impact. Because impact happens whether we like it or not in all areas of our business. Now, I tried to change how big the smiles were on these, so it's quite hard. But I've kind of got a flat smile here and a flat smile here. So we've got some really good stuff happening in the operational space. Many of you might already be signed up to Toitu or ECOS and looking at lowering your emissions, your carbon emissions. And you might be doing that through looking at your fleet of transport or how you heat space, etc. We've got lots of organisations undergoing a strategy review, and a big component of that is how climate-related risks and opportunities are integrated into your strategy. We've talked already about grant making and how we're serving the narrative through better data coding. So let's move on to these 2 spaces. So we've taken up the opportunity to do some research recently with Jana, Forsyth Barr and Fisher Funds actually, and interviewing 15 fund managers. So I'm going to move between the language of fund managers or asset managers. So this piece of work, the funders' commitment, is specific to funders, right? So today we're talking about what that looks like. If you are a funder, you have assets under management, you have portfolios. So what can we do to unlock climate potential through our investments? And what we've really established is that we can act together as signatories. Currently, we have 18 signatories with approximately 6 billion of assets under management. So that's quite a chunk of finance. And, you know, I started this conversation earlier with, you know, finance can leave us dry, but our finance is really impactful for good or for bad. So that's why it's really important. So if we take more of a unified signatory approach to strengthen our collective influence on asset managers, we can actually accelerate climate-aligned investing. There's a lot going on in this slide, so I'll try and just speak to the important bits. What we've established is that we've got 2 things here that I've kind of pointed arrows at. We've got 1, engagement effort. I'll try and explain that. That is how we engage with our asset manager. So we have an asset manager who works for us as funders, and we want to ensure that we engage them in a way that is meaningful around climate risk and opportunity of our assets under management. So this is assets under management here. We also have just what's called the investment effort. So our money is going to do the mahi, whether like for good or for bad. So today I'm not speaking necessarily to investment effort. Today is not a talk on investment. It's more a talk on what we can do in the investment space as signatories. So what we can do is we can ask consistent engagement questions to our asset managers, which can drive and accelerate change. And we can think about asset allocation. We can think about what commitments we've got to responsible investment, and we can think about what commitments we've got to net zero. So essentially the purpose of this recent research is around going further and faster to engage more deeply at a board level. So if you are on a board, which some of you are, it's about what can be your collective influence as a board on asset managers. What do you know about your portfolios? And, you know, most things in the finance space are not particularly accessible or relatable. So is it our job to try and understand more about what's actually happening in our assets under management and how we can engage our asset managers? So very recently, we did a great workshop with all of our community trusts around the country. And a quote that came up from Rata Foundation was, collectively, we've realised we're driving the car, not merely a passenger in the car being driven by the asset manager. Now, I just need to say that I'm not in any way taking any of the expertise away from asset managers. They serve us and they have great expertise, but it's important that we understand and put ourselves in the driver's seat. And so this is an individual reflection that I asked of all of our community trusts in that workshop. And I'm not going to make this interactive, although I'd absolutely love to, because just talking at you is not that much fun. But I think it's something that you can do outside of this. So the first question that I would ask of you as a board or as community funders or just as charities is, what is our charity's mission, or what is our trust mission? And in what ways do our current investments support or contradict that? So this was a really useful activity to do, because sometimes we just forget actually the words around our trust's mission, and it's quite important to come back to it. Are there sectors or companies in our portfolio that might be misaligned? And how are we as trustees, or we might be in the executive leadership team, how are we engaging with our asset managers? And so I don't expect this to be a large part of today, but it's just to show you some of the thinking that's going on in this particular network. And it might be useful for you to kind of spark some interest around your board. So a really awesome piece of legislation which kind of makes us reflect about impact is the Trust Act in 2019, which actually outlines the powers and duties of trustees. And it shows that we can prioritise community, social and environmental or cultural impact alongside financial returns. We often have a traditional conservative view that we need to kind of keep money safe in order to use its dividends for good. And I'll explain that in a moment. So if you take a look at why this matters on screen here, then it's all about kind of mission aligned investing. So impact must be material. Proportionality matters. What I mean by that is, if we imagine the net worth of some of our organisations or funds, they might be rather large compared to the 5% that we're granting. So when we speak to the impact that we're having, we need to think about how material that impact is. Perhaps a really great way to kind of show some of this, I'm just going to move you up there, Michelle, is the way that we traditionally manage our funds is to grow money and then to gift the dividends, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So we invest our capital, often in kind of mainstream ways or more conventional ways, lots of equities, could be lots of other portfolio types as well. The aim is to kind of keep it safe in perpetuity. And then we use this income of the capital for impact. So this is a kind of perceived safe way of doing things. However, I'm going to throw that on its head, because this is actually a perception that it's keeping it safe, because climate change is the #1 risk to our assets. So we just have to ask ourselves whether it's truly being kept safe. This is the conventional way we do things. I've put the word new in inverted commas because impact investment is not new, but it's a different way of thinking about the structure that we just talked to. So we have capital invested, as we did before. We keep some of it safe, and we can directly invest in impact from that capital. This is called direct investment or impact investment. I'm absolutely sure you know this, but I think it's a great way to illustrate it. This is supposed to have an arrow here, but it's essentially just saying that the income of capital can still be used for impact. So in a way, you are kind of double dipping for impact, but this one here, investing for impact, is quite complex and still quite new in New Zealand. So it does hold more risks, which is why people move to this blue space time and time again. The return on investment, the financial return on investment, is often lower here because of the more risks attached to it. And so it's a hard space to kind of move into. However, we know from the legislation that I just showed you, that actually this is also, we can enable this as trustees. So why would we not look into it further? And if the purpose or the mission of our trust is to better our community in some way and to serve our community in some way, then surely this is something that we can look to more. So I've spoken about this like really glibly, and anyone with a finance background might be tearing their hair out or asking a lot more questions. But it's really just to kind of pose and provoke some thinking rather than to do any deep dives. This actually does make up a session that we have on our website, which is around climate governance. And there's a great piece on our website, which you can access for free. And I'll speak to that at the end if it's of interest to you. So data, or data, as I call it, is something which is increasingly becoming more important. And one of the things that we've really tried to do around our funders' commitment is to create some strong data foundations, which frankly we didn't have before around climate action. And really, you know, everyone's learning in this space together. The North Star of, I guess, mandates and climate disclosures is completely changing, and it's becoming much more strict. So what we're trying to achieve is we want to create a clear dashboard for our impact, and we'll start to see that coming through our funders' commitment as of 2025. So I just wanted to let you know that we have been on a journey too, and that journey is around more rigor, more well-designed data architecture, and more visibility and transparency around what that looks like. We do know that all of these things here are going to serve us well. So we do know that great leaders demand measurable results. If we can't measure impact, then actually we need to be a bit wary of whether we're greenwashing. We do need to drive alignment to those metrics, and we do want to tell inspiring stories. And the only way we can really, you know, people talk a lot about storytelling and why it matters. And it's like, well, it only matters if it can be substantiated, and it can be compelling when it is substantiated. So our dashboard that we've been working on, and that's going to be part of our 2025 reporting, looks at substantiated evidence around only 10 indicators. Now, I'm not going to speak to these today, but if you want to become a signatory, you will obviously find out more about that. But what we've done is we've created what we call a life cycle approach. Rather than like a scoreboard. We don't want this to be reflective of a kind of, I guess, competitive environment. We want it to be a collaborative environment, and we built it on more of a Te Ao Māori worldview. So we show our progress based on these 6 stages of the life cycle, and the indicators that we use work across those 5 levers of the organization that I showed you earlier with the smiley faces on. So we can really measure it against things like our governance and our reporting in the governance aspect and our operational side, etc. Essentially, evidence can no longer be wishy-washy. We can't just speak to a singular case study that was amazing, for example, because it might not be material against the whole big picture of what we're doing. We need to make our evidence accessible, not hidden in deep reports, and we want to make it relatable. And I've used these words wishy-washy really intentionally, because I just want to mention the words greenwishing and greenwashing. So greenwishing is where we go, we are committed to net zero by 2050. And we publicly state that, perhaps on our website or in our reporting. But what's not available or accessible as part of that green wishing is the interim targets of how we're going to get there, the testable pathway of how we're going to get there. That's called green wishing. It's really well intentioned, and we're really good at it in New Zealand, in Aotearoa. But actually, we need to kind of stop doing it unless we can have a testable pathway of how we're going to get there. Our stakeholders want to know. And greenwashing is the bit that I spoke about before, where we talk about how material, the size and proportionality of it, whether that impact is 1% of what we're actually doing, or whether it's significant. So examples of litigation show us, I guess, the pathway to what we need to do better. So lawyers for climate action have spoken to litigation, for example, with Z Energy. And if that's something that you want to know more about, then you can look into that. But what we're seeing is precedential case law that is showing us that we need to be really careful, because otherwise we could be litigated against. So where does governance fit in all of this? Well, some of you on the call will know all of this stuff, and telling that impact story to me reflects what good climate governance is in action. So this particular graphic here is taken from the World Economic Forum, WEF. Again, on our website, all of this material is there, and you can do a deep dive into any of this. Also, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, if you're interested in better governance, you can do the IOD course, Chapter 0, or you can also do some work with InFins as well. There's lots happening in this space. So what we're aiming to achieve is obviously, I say rather glibly, have impact in all 5 levers of our organisation, and to be able to substantiate what that looks like. So our mindset on impact is changing through the funders' commitment on climate action. What we're beginning to see is that our capital investment, our capital, our assets under manager, is moving away from an accumulation of capital in extractive industries, for example, fossil fuels, mining, etc. Things that take away from our communities and don't additionally benefit them, towards a reallocation of capital that directly supports communities, distant or local. This is really important, because it might be that we're locally doing something really good with our grant making, but if our distant money is doing something that causes harm elsewhere, how good is that? So we're starting to see this reflected in the way that we work with our asset managers. Granting is moving away from more of an unbalanced power dynamic of givers and receivers. We're seeing this. I'm sure many of you on the call are doing a lot more around participatory grant making, involving our communities in the decision making rather than doing it on their behalf. We're seeing a shift in governance. This is going to take time. We're all on this journey together. Essentially, generic governance is not really serving us for a future that looks quite different, because a lot of our governance does assist what's happening with our assets. So we're seeing a shift towards climate governance. And again, this material is on our website if you want to do a deep dive. And reporting, we're seeing a shift away from solely sentiment or target-based data towards that which is more substantiated, something that we can actually speak to in terms of testable pathways. So our website is this one here. You may have already looked at it whilst you're on the call. I guess one thing that I will say as a wee kind of disclaimer is that we don't have a massive amount of funding for this work. So our website does reflect some quite grassroots stuff, but it also has an absolute plethora of resources that are really useful. So I mentioned the TICA resources before. You can see some of these here. It also has the 5 levers that we've spoken about, and heaps of resources in there. It also has some webinars, which are based around 15 minutes, kind of short talks that are just an opportunity for you to do deeper dives. We provide briefing papers, and we can also do research commissioned to your needs. So if you're a signatory you get a wealth of information and facilitation, and we can provide all of that to you as part of being a signatory. If you're not a signatory and you're just interested, there's heaps of stuff that's for free on our website, so help yourself to that. And I asked you this already, so are you a signatory to the funders' commitment? I don't think any of you are online. If it's something that you're interested in or think could have alignment, then just Michelle will actually share my email with the webinar following this. And I thought that perhaps I could end with this slide, not for us to discuss now, but perhaps you can take a screenshot or a photograph of it. And I just literally did a workshop with a board immediately before this, and I got them to pick out a couple of questions. And one of the first things they said is, do we have the relevant data on who will be impacted most in our community? This is the stuff around just Aotearoa transition. If we don't have this data, we might not be able to serve our community as well as we ought. Have we included local whānau, iwi and hapu community groups in our discussions and decision-making processes? Look, we're all on the spectrum here. So some of you are doing this work incredibly well, and we see your leadership. Others are trying to kind of get ahead as well. So take a picture of this and maybe just ask your board or your executive leadership team if any of these questions are being asked. We might not know the answers yet, but one top tip is ensure that your board has a standing item on climate action in every single board meeting. Even if they don't yet know what to discuss, it needs to be there. So in every monthly board meeting, they have a climate action item. And you can perhaps influence your board by bringing these kind of questions and potentially some pathways, such as being a signatory or other opportunities, to help them move your organisation forward. So I'm going to end there with a karakia, and we should be bang on time, I think. And if we have time for any questions, maybe you can pop them in the chat and we can follow up. But I thank you so much for your time and for giving up your lunch break. So let's just close with a karakia. E te ho, e te ora, whitiwhitia mai te maramatanga, hei arahi ia mātou mahi. O breath of life, shine light upon us to guide our work. Thank you. Kia ora, everybody.